Welcome, everybody, to today's University of Illinois Extension webinar program, brought to you by Extension in cooperation with the Illinois Broadband Lab and the Illinois Office of Broadband, and under cooperation of such partners as the Illinois Association of County Board Members and Heartland Forward. My name is Mike Delaney, and I'm an Extension Community and Economic Development Educator. I'm based up here in Ogle County in the northwestern corner of the state. And today's webinar is an introduction to Illinois' BEAD challenge process. We'll begin with the usual quick housekeeping. First off, we will be recording today's webinar. At the conclusion of today's presentation, registered participants will receive an email with materials from today's presentation and access to the recording of the webinar in our Community and Economic Development archives on YouTube. If you didn't register in advance and would like to receive the materials, please drop your email into the chat box to let us know, and we'll be sure to get the materials to you. As always, if you have questions or comments, please use the chat space. We'll be having a Q&A session at the end of the prepared remarks. We'll review the questions in the Q&A, and perhaps if some of our colleagues jump in the middle of things, they'll answer questions as we go along, but focus on Q&A at the end of the presentations. So I'd like to welcome our speakers today, who are very familiar, as you know, to anyone who's followed University of Extension's extensive webinar offerings on broadband in Illinois over the last 2.5 years or so. Today, we're going to start with Matt Schmidt from the Illinois Office of Broadband. Matt, take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you, everybody, with University of Illinois Extension. Once again, a great webinar discussion today, this time talking about the BEAD mapping challenge process. And so we're a couple months away from this opening up likely, but it's really important for stakeholders to start talking about the opportunity, thinking through their respective approaches to taking full advantage of this engagement opportunity, and also just to start a dialogue with our Office of Broadband and our Illinois Broadband Lab team. And so today we have a similar deck of slides relative to the October 17th webinar session that we shared with you. So that is curated online if you'd like to check that out. But we're going to engage with the material a little bit differently today. And so you'll see some similarities, but hopefully this does add value to the webinar that you joined a week ago that, again, is hosted on our Extension website. And so first of all, level setting with the goals and requirements of the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, the BEAD program. Also looking to overview the BEAD timeline, all the work, the sequencing of events that will be taking place in the weeks, months, and years ahead. We'll get into a little bit of an overview on Illinois' BEAD plan, our progress that we've made to date. Also just pointing folks to the Illinois Broadband Office website, where we are currently housing our draft initial proposal, Volume 1 and Volume 2, for public comment. So we really want folks to check that out and let us know your thoughts. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a good conversation about how you can engage. And I think that's a theme of this year, a lot of opportunities for public input, for engagement, and we want to make sure that Illinoisans everywhere know how to take part. And so with that said, we can dive into the overview of the BEAD program. And so moving into the next slide here, talking about the key goals and requirements of the BEAD program. Again, this was included in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, now 2 years old. It has put us to work for the last couple of years preparing for the arrival of over $1 billion of broadband deployment funding for the state, which will line up very well with our Connect Illinois Broadband Grant Program. And round 4 of that program anticipated to launch in 2024. But the first goal of the BEAD program, consistent with our Connect Illinois goals, ensure universal coverage across all unserved locations in the state, leaving no home, business, farm, community anchor institution behind. We want to make sure that there is connectivity everywhere. And the BEAD NOFO does specify a prioritization for end-to-end fiber, but I have to tell you folks, it's going to take an all hands on deck approach here in Illinois. So we want all providers, different technology types. If you're interested in helping us meet the goals of universal access throughout the state, we really want to work with you because we're going to need your help and your contribution. So that's the first goal, universal access. Secondly, getting into prioritizing projects that go beyond unserved locations to those that are underserved. They have good but not great connectivity, not well positioned to compete in the 21st century economy in the years ahead. We want to do everything we can to make sure that there are no longer any underserved locations in Illinois. That would be those that lack broadband access to 100 megabits per second download, 20 megabits per second upload or greater. And then again, a focus on community anchor institutions, making sure they have the connectivity to meet their needs of today and tomorrow, and then looking into other applications of eligible BEAD funding, getting into multi-dwelling units, other Wi-Fi and digital equity and inclusion priorities. All right. So the third piece here is the subgrantee process. And this is something that's very clear in the BEAD NOFO that states will have 1 year to run their own subgrantee process with the use of BEAD funds. And it works out really well with our Connect Illinois Broadband Grant Program. We are wrapping up round 3 of that program in the coming months, and it should dovetail seamlessly into round 4 of the Connect Illinois Broadband Grant Program again, which will leverage all $1 billion of the BEAD allocation to Illinois. And this is work that will not get done overnight, and that is very clear in the BEAD NOFO. This is a generational investment to solve problems for the long term. But what we want to do is balance that's a priority that's clearly articulated in the BEAD Notice of Funding Opportunity with our urgency to get connectivity and access across the state as quick as we can. We'll have 4 years to complete this work. And then finally, making sure that we're also focusing on other aspects of the digital divide, including broadband affordability. It's not just about focusing on broadband network expansion. Our goals include affordable access, identifying and breaking down other barriers that contribute to the digital divide. So that's the BEAD NOFO in a nutshell. Again, a lot of alignment with what we've been doing here in Illinois with the Connect Illinois Broadband Grant. A lot of activity in that orange color. You'll see Connect Illinois round 3. We're well into that mapping and merit review, 200 applications seeking over $1 billion of funding in round 3. And then we'll be moving into round 4 of Connect Illinois with a request for information process to get feedback from likely eligible applicants, those that will be participating in round 4. And that will start in the weeks and months ahead. So look for more information this calendar year, 2023, on how you as a provider or a likely applicant can take part in our RFI process. But that's not the focus of today's conversation. Preparing for those BEAD funds, locking in the map is the priority. And so as you can see, Connect Illinois round 4 will have multiple waves beginning in 2024 and stretching into the out years. As you get into the BEAD planning work, that second line across here in purple, we're finished with our BEAD initial proposal. Again, as mentioned, that's open for public comment right now. Go to our Connect Illinois website. You'll have an opportunity to look at the proposal, and you have until 5 p.m. on October 31, right before you go trick-or-treating for Halloween, to get your thoughts on our proposed approach for the use of BEAD funds to us. And it's not just about how we use the funds that we're looking for public comment on, it's also how we engage stakeholders and conduct our mapping challenge process. And so that is the focus of today's conversation. What you see here, that second arrow here with in purple, the challenge process, outreach and implementation. We are launching that outreach and implementation. We expect that our mapping challenge process will open perhaps in December, but it's increasingly likely with every day that goes by that this challenge process will be a process that takes place in January of 2024. So again, very good that we're having these conversations now, preparing for what's ahead. And then you can see we'll have our initial proposal due at the end of 2024 here, or sorry, the end of 2023, December 27th to be exact. And then a lot of the work in round 4 of Connect Illinois will lead to the BEAD final proposal, which we have 365 days to complete through multiple waves of applicant or subgrantee engagement that likely will extend throughout 2024 and perhaps into 2025. And so you can see a lot of implementation, the third row here, throughout the decade. Again, a generational investment in broadband expansion, solving public policy challenges with internet access limitation throughout the state once and for all here. And then finally, a lot of this is operating in conjunction with similar historic investment in digital equity. And so we'll have our state digital equity plan out for public comment, likely again, early 2024. Right now, we have the Digital Equity Capacity Kickstarter Grant Program, where we're investing in a lot of great efforts and initiatives at the local level, particularly around digital inclusion and other digital literacy skill building, and preparing for the Digital Equity Capacity Grant that will come to Illinois in 2024. A lot of work on digital equity. Again, another opportunity for input when that state digital equity plan is available for public comment in early 2024. When those federal dollars show up on digital equity, we'll be able to implement and run our own subgrantee process throughout 2024, 2025, and beyond. And so lots of opportunity on the digital equity front. But again, let's level set. Let's focus today's conversation about engaging stakeholders, providers, local governments, nonprofits, Illinoisans everywhere, how to lock in the map to make sure it's as accurate as possible so that when we start deploying BEAD dollars in 2024, we know where those unserved and underserved locations are. We know what our needs of our community anchor institutions are and where we can direct investment accordingly. So moving on to the next slide here, we're going to get into Illinois' BEAD proposal. And you can see it's been a long, winding road throughout the year. It began in March and June, where we had a very ambitious statewide listening tour, engaged with Illinoisans in every one of our 10 economic development regions, over 50 listening sessions in person, as well as a number of webinars and online engagement opportunities. We had an online survey as well as a phone survey that was able to match qualitative feedback with quantitative data. And a lot of that work fed into our 5-year action plan, which we released for informal comment in August and then submitted to the National Telecommunications Information Administration. I'm not sure if we're going to get any feedback on that 5-year action plan, but it was a good stake in the road on our way towards the initial proposal where we are today. Again, $1 billion allocated to the state of Illinois, and the initial proposal public comment period allows for stakeholders, Illinoisans everywhere, to comment on our intended or at least planned use of those dollars. And so again, that brings us to today. How do we lock in the maps to make sure that they're most accurate and help us guide investment in this generational investment opportunity? And so moving forward, I would like to pass the mic to my colleague, Shabika Agarwal from the Illinois Broadband Lab. Shabika has done an amazing job working with stakeholders, helping us perfect our approach to data collection and mapping. And so without further ado, Shabika, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the overview of BEAD, level setting on the timelines and what we've been doing so far in 2023. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. In the remainder of the presentation, really diving into the components of the initial proposal and specifically the BEAD challenge process. So with the initial proposal, volume 1, there are like 2 big components there. One with the BEAD challenge process that we're going to discuss, and also identifying the community anchor institutions across the state. So firstly, with what's the goal of the challenge process? It's to make sure that the maps are accurate and we have rightfully identified the unserved and underserved locations across the state, including community anchor institutions that would be eligible. This is important only because broadband serviceable locations that will be categorized as unserved, underserved, and eligible CAIs would then be eligible for BEAD funding that's going to be coming into the state. So who can actually participate in the challenge process? It's going to be local units of government, nonprofit organizations, and internet service providers. Residents can participate in the process through their local governments and nonprofit organizations who serve within their communities. There's going to be more details on how that's going to happen and how you can reach out to, like, your local government and nonprofit to actively engage. We're going to have how-to webinar series with details on the challenge portal that we are developing and how exactly would you be interacting with that to submit your challenges in the coming weeks and months. What can really be challenged? So we do, again, have more information on this in the following slides, but it's essentially eligibility of locations, so whether they be unserved, underserved, or not. The locations that have prior enforceable commitments or planned service. So this would include any prior state or federal funding for broadband infrastructure deployment in these regions. So it could be through various USDA programs like Community Connect or Reconnect, through RDOF, CAF2 or Broadband Infrastructure Program in the past, or if there's a previous state funded program like Connect Illinois or if there's investment through ARPA or CPF and things like that. So those would not be eligible for funding, and that'll be up for a challenge as part of the challenge process that's been designed. So now taking a closer look at what the maps currently say. The map here represents the broadband serviceable locations. So just to level set, a broadband serviceable location is a business or residential location in the United States at which mass market fixed broadband internet access service is available or can be installed. One note here is that we may not have all community anchor institutions show up on the FCC map as a broadband serviceable location, just because of the assumption that they may not always subscribe to mass market fixed broadband internet access. So we're going to have in the following slides discuss more on engagement through CAIs and how they can basically interact with the map and information that the office has put together. Then looking at the unserved locations, so it's going to be locations that currently have reported to receive less than 25 by 3 megabits per second of fixed broadband service, and underserved is any location that receives between 25 by 3 and 100 by 20 speeds. So based on the current outlook, based on the current data, and this is prior to including any of the enforceable commitments or planned service, it's nearly 366,000 locations in the state that would be unserved and underserved. We have them represented in pink and blue on the map here, so kind of distributed across the state, and it's seemingly mostly the low density areas, and accounting for 9% of the locations out of the total 4.2 million locations identified in Illinois. In the next slide, as I mentioned, getting into the community anchor institutions bit. So how does the NOFO define community anchor institutions? So those would be institutions that provide critical services and support to residents, especially those in underrepresented communities. So the idea is initially developing a list of all the community anchor institutions in the state, and then ensuring which of these would be eligible. So eligibility is determined based on access to gigabit symmetrical service. On the right-hand side here, we have the list, the categories of community anchor institutions that have been incorporated in the list for Illinois. So a couple of things to note here. If there are any comments in terms of categories we might be missing for a CAI that should be included, that feedback can be submitted as part of the public comment that's open until October 31st. In the initial proposal, volume 1, we also have details on the various data sources that we have used to compile the list of organizations under each of these categories. So that could be a helpful sort of point to look at as you are going through the resources and feedback as part of the public comment, but that can also be shared during the BEAD challenge process itself. At that point in time, you can also share feedback on eligibility. So to determine eligibility, we have basically used a few different sources. So overall, we have identified 23.8 thousand community anchor institutions in Illinois, of which, from our analysis, 5,400 would be eligible for BEAD funding. And the different sources that we have utilized for this is basically the E-rate data to get a sense of institutions that might already be served through E-rate. We've also contacted the state's middle mile network operator, the Illinois Century Network, and use their data to get a sense of institutions that already would have gigabit service through them. And then we've also carried out a proximity analysis to all the gigabit symmetrical services areas in the state. So just excluding those from eligibility. But again, you have a better sense of the service that's available at your location. So however that is represented, please do take a look at that. And if it does not reflect your actual situation, you can share that as part of the public comment or also through the BEAD Challenge program. So we have these lists on the Federal Broadband tab on the Illinois Office of Broadband website. We have list of all CAIs and also the eligible CAIs. So please do take a look at that and share your feedback. In the next slide here, we're basically looking at the different types of challenges that would be accepted as part of the BEAD challenge process. So 3 categories, essentially: broadband serviceable locations, enforceable commitments or plan service, and community anchor institutions. So for broadband serviceable locations, the challenges can be made based on availability, speed, latency, data cap, technology, and whether it's only business service that's available at that location. So we're trying to build a map that essentially shows what's reported on the FCC maps that makes it easier for residents, local governments, and nonprofits to actually engage with the data and use that as a baseline to see whether they would like to challenge, and also internet service providers to get a sense of what the maps really say. So that's going to be a baseline that we're trying to build so that engagement in the process is easier. The next category is the enforceable commitment. So again, when we share out that map, there's going to be information on various areas that might have received prior funding. That's also going to be up for a challenge and helping us get a better sense of which of those areas may or may not be covered through previous funding efforts. And then the most important part here would also be the community anchor institutions. So essentially utilizing the list at this point, and we're going to ensure that we translate that list onto the map as well and show all the different community anchor institutions in the state and the ones that we have identified as eligible that can also be challenged as part of the BEAD challenge process. Again, there's going to be more details on the evidence that would be accepted for these different categories and how that can be submitted. A lot of times it could be communication with a provider or website screenshots and things like that. But there's going to be more details on that soon in future webinars. A brief sort of overview on the timeline. So again, as Matt mentioned, we do not have a clear start date for this yet because it kind of depends on NTIA's approval for our initial proposal, volume 1. That is when we can start it. It's looking like it could start December 2023 or January 2024, and it's going to be 4 months from the start date is when we're going to run it. The first phase is going to be the challenge phase, where we're going to be accepting a lot of this feedback from local governments and nonprofits and internet service providers. And residents, again, can also participate through their local units of government and nonprofits in their areas. The next phase is going to be the rebuttal, again, at least 14 days. And there's different, again, requirements for what can be submitted for rebuttal. There's going to be more information on that. It's also currently mentioned in the initial proposal, volume 1. So if you'd like to take a look at it right now, that's available in the document on the Illinois Office of Broadband website. The next phase is going to be final determination. This is going to be through the Illinois Office of Broadband. We're going to make sure which of these would be accepted and which of these would be rejected. And finally, post a map for all the eligible locations for at least 60 days so that it's available before we start with the sub-grantee process. Some information is available in volume 1 of the initial proposal, so you can certainly take a look at it now. But as I mentioned, there's going to be webinars detailing a lot of this moving ahead. Briefly looking at components of initial proposal, volume 2. This is not an exhaustive list. There's a lot of important elements in that, but a few things that we'd like to highlight is it talks about the timeline for BEAD round 4, essentially. So there's also going to be an RFI process to get feedback on project area units, and we would appreciate feedback on that and how the process is really going to run, the sub-grantee process. There's details on that. There's information on approach to prioritize the hard-to-serve areas. So essentially those which have higher unserved locations, those would be categorized as hard to serve, and we will try to prioritize those as we start with the sub-grantee process. There's information on the scoring rubric. So as Matt mentioned, we have the Connect Illinois program that's been running for 3 to 4 years now. We're currently in our round 3. So we've tried to keep the scoring pretty consistent with how the grant program has been running in Illinois, and just ensuring that we still meet the BEAD requirements. So a few tweaks here and there, but there's a lot of information on what that's going to look like for Illinois and for Connect Illinois Round 4 with the BEAD funding in Initial Proposal Volume 2. And then there's also information on the stakeholder engagement. So we again want to make sure that we continue to share key milestones, like with the BEAD challenge process now and moving ahead with sub-grantee process and all the different aspects of BEAD planning. If we have questions, please do share them in the chat. We will get to the questions at the end of the presentation because we have a few more presenters to share potential collaboration efforts. In this section, really talking about how to engage. So during, the public comment period, as I mentioned, we have a federal broadband tab at the Illinois Office of Broadband website, which has links to the initial proposal Volume 1 and Volume 2. And there's also the list of eligible CAIs on there, and also all the other CAIs that we have identified across the state. So you can take a look at that, review the information, and share your comment. There's a link to a smart sheet where you can actually type in which volume of the initial proposal you're submitting comment for, and then share your feedback. So we have QR codes here that you could scan, but we'll also be following up with links to the website as part of the email that we share out later. In terms of how to engage, what can be done at this point in time? So now would be the time to start thinking about a lot of these things. We'll have a pre-registration process with the BEAD Challenge portal that we're developing. We were anticipating sharing the pre-registration links by October 25th, which is tomorrow. If there are delays, we will keep you posted. Subscribing to our newsletter would be one avenue to have the most updated information. Another thing that can be done is designating staff and agency leads to coordinate some of these efforts in your communities if you're interested in participating, just trying to build that capacity at this point in time. Third is identifying any areas with limited or inconsistent broadband services. We'll be having a presentation from the Internet Equity Initiative in a while. So we can help you connect with them for any speed testing efforts that you would want to carry out for the purposes of the BEAD challenge process. Start to make an outreach plan, and including different agencies that can help support the BEAD challenge process. That's going to be important. And then also considering entering into a license agreement with CostQuest so that you have access to the location fabric, which is essentially the list of all broadband serviceable locations in the area that you serve. So having that is not a necessity, but if you are an organization that works with a larger area and would like to utilize a few different data sets that are available out there to carry out your own analysis and identify target areas and submit challenges. So this might be something to consider. And again, we have representatives from CostQuest who can share more about that. For now, I'm going to pass it on to the Internet Equity Initiative team to share about the speed testing efforts that they can help support if you're a community that's interested. So I'm going to invite Mark and Nzinga to share.
Kubika, let me jump in here for just a moment. Yeah. Before Mark and Nzinga kick in, let's address a couple questions that were posed in the chat before we move on.
Perfect. Sounds good.
And some of them have been answered, but you can illuminate perhaps the background for a couple of them. First off, the map, there was a question about the map being very helpful. Will the information be available by census tract?
That's a great question. So yeah, the map, it's essentially going to be every individual location. So it's even more granular than the census tract. It's going to be information for how every location is categorized. Would it be considered unserved, underserved, or served based on the BEAD definitions? And there's going to be information on providers who have already reported to serve that particular location. So it's going to be much more granular.
Okay, good, thanks. In terms of determining CAI status and those that do not have 1 gigabyte service, is that all based on self-reporting, or is there additional work there that?
Yes, great question again. As I'd mentioned, we've basically referred to quite a few data sources to carry out that analysis internally. So looked at the E-rate survey, the middle mile Illinois Century Network data, and also carried out a proximity analysis to locations that may be closer to those gigabit service areas. So that is what we've used to identify or basically arrive at eligibility at this point in time. And so that's also something that we are requesting feedback on, and that can be something that's challenged through the BEAD challenge process. So yeah, those are the sources that we've used, and we are inviting any feedback on how we've categorized it based on our analysis.
Very good, very good. I think we saw in the list of definitions of CAIs that correctional facilities are included, so that
yes,
checks off that one. In terms of how CAI access is defined, in other words, to get 1 gig symmetrical, you need fiber. How near or far does the fiber have to be to the anchor institution in order to be considered, in order for that anchor institution to be considered as having access?
So yeah, we just want to make sure that you have access to the community anchor institution. So yeah, it has to be up to the building, which is the community anchor institutions. If not, you would be eligible. And so if there's not a provider who already provides that fiber service to the community anchor institution directly, they would be eligible.
Okay, so if the building isn't wired, isn't concretely wired, if it doesn't actually have an internet connection via fiber, it is eligible.
Yes.
No matter how close a fiber run might be to the building, it has to be connected to the building.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Oh, here's one that popped in. Would the YMCA be considered a CAI?
Yes, it would be. I believe we have those included in the list that we have curated for the state. So yes. And if there are certain locations that are missing, again, inviting feedback on locations that might not have been included already.
Okay, very good. I think there's a pop tune built into that question, but we'll deal with that another time. All right, then. I think that's it for the questions. Let's kick it over to Mark.
And I'll kick it over to Nzinga to start us off.
Oops, sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. Thank you. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Nzinga. I'm the Community Project Manager for the Internet Equity Initiative at the University of Chicago. And I am here with Mark Richardson. He's our Technical Project Manager. We're presenting on leveraging device-based measurement for the Illinois State BEAD challenges, and we're looking at this from a data-driven approach. So thank you, everyone, for coming and listening. And I wanted to first start with the question of how can we identify areas of need? And we know that lived experiences don't match our current data, and we know that these data sources are not all inclusive and can't give us an accurate picture of what's going on in people's homes and businesses. Instead, what we need is this lived experience data consistently and accurately being measured from individuals. So now I'm going to hand it back over to Mark to tell you guys more about how our devices can help us and get the data that we're looking for.
Yes, thank you, Nzinga. So before I get started here, I want to just reiterate that what we are hoping to talk to you about today is an alternative method and thinking about speed testing and collecting performance data to help you decide where to invest funds and also to be used in the BEAD challenge process. So I'm going to dive into the technical bits a little bit here. We want to leverage advances in distributed and cloud computing to deploy better measurement software that produces better data. And we call that specific measurement software Netrix. Netrix is installed on a small computer, and then we connect that device, which I have one right here with me, by the way. It's just about the size of 2 packs of playing cards. And we connect this device to a router or modem anywhere folks get internet service. And then we can actively measure the internet connection and send data back to a central computer to be stored and analyzed. And I'll get into the data details in a little bit, but for now, you can think of this device as kind of a health monitor for your home internet. So you install the device, and then it tells you how fit your internet is. So what do I mean by device measurement? I'm talking about using a dedicated device that you wire to a home router with an Ethernet cable, for instance, and then you measure the network over that device. And this is different from a crowdsourced speed test that someone might take on Ookla.com or Measurement Lab. And it's also different from ISP-provided diagnostics. The cool thing about device-based measurement is that we can take performance measurements consistently over time. So we can actually show that our approach produces better data than alternatives. And we've done a lot of work with this over the last 2 years with researchers at the University of Chicago perfecting a lot of the measurements that we take. The measurements over time provide a far more compelling picture of a household's internet service than just a few scattered browser-based speed tests. And we think the data are less biased and less subject to randomness than some of the alternatives. And just to reiterate, device-based is not always possible or preferable, and we don't necessarily want to discourage people from using the other tools that are out there, but we think that in certain specific instances, our devices produce better data that can be more useful and hopefully tap into broader pools of residents and communities to help generate that data. So why do we think local governments and nonprofits can benefit from Netrix specifically for the BEAD challenge process? There are three main reasons. First, we like to say you can fish with a big net. Netrix has a whole suite of diagnostic tools that generate performance data. The second is that devices are easy to install. And third, the data from the devices can be used to validate performance benchmarks with multiple measurements over time. So, sorry, can you go to the next slide? So Netrix collects data using 3 different speed tools. So you can actually validate the performance, bandwidth performance of an address with 3 different speed tools, and those measurements are taken over time. So if we deploy a device for a week, we may collect on average 20 measurements of their speed. All that's to emphasize that you can challenge with a lot of different data. And in addition to speed data, we also collect latency data to over 20 different servers and popular websites. Beyond speed and latency, we also measure a lot of other metrics. As I mentioned, we have the number of connected devices, hops, retransmissions, and packet loss. We can also detect outages on the device. And understandably, there are challenges that go along with this kind of approach. You might be thinking right now, for instance, that we're a bit nuts to go around asking people to put literal black boxes in their house. And we understand that, and we have worked a lot with residents in Chicago to facilitate trust, to build trust. And the feedback here has shown that our devices are user-friendly. They come with clear instructions. We've had very few participants struggle to install the device. Most have said that they would likely refer others to this program. And we see a lot of excitement in general from folks to pitch in and validate their community's internet experiences. Our exit surveys show that our instructions are effective and helpful and clear. Almost no one we sampled had a negative experience. And the time investment to set up the device was small for most participants. It took about 5 to 10 minutes, and no one we sampled took more than 15. Now, let's take a closer look at the actual data that these devices produce. So here we have a table of device data. These are speed tests that were taken from with UCLA and measurement lab tools. And these were actual data from devices we've deployed in Chicago. Each row is one device in one household. So you can kind of think of this as a aggregate view of the household speed performance. Now, I don't want you to worry too much about all the data that I'm throwing at you, other than to notice that you can clearly see that some households have a green or good connection, and other ones have a worse connection that's shaded orange. We can clearly identify households that are below federal minimums for unserved and underserved in this table, and that's great. However, we want to emphasize that we're fishing with a big net here. These households are not being represented by just this one aggregate value. Because of the way we collect the data and archive it for later use, we can actually see a whole distribution of measurements that can then be used to validate whether or not an address is served or underserved or unserved. We're completely confident that these measurements are sound because we have so much breadth and depth in our measurement, and in addition to the frequency at which we measure. So it's hard to argue with this amount of precision. And here we can see in these charts that the health of a household's internet connection can fluctuate quite a bit over time. We can identify households that have clear outlier performance, as the figure here shows on the right. This is the speed test data, right? But underserved doesn't just mean low speed. If we look at this chart of latency here, we can also see that some houses that might have moderate broadband performance might have latency performance that makes Zoom a nightmare. These locations should rightly be considered in BEAD allocations. So we think our data has a lot to offer, but we cannot do this alone. Our devices will help make data more accurate and less biased by removing some of the human randomness in measurement. But humans fundamentally are at the core of this process to collect data, which serves the community. And with that, I'll have Nzinga close us out with some more information about the partnerships we are looking to build.
So with all this being said, like Mark said, there's still the fact that tech doesn't get much done without human beings. This holds true for Netrix as much as any other piece of technology. So in order for us to have a successful deployment of Netrix devices, capturing all the data that we need for these BEAD challenges, we really do need our communities. This is a community-based effort that requires working with nonprofits, local governments, community anchors like schools, libraries, farm bureaus, housing complexes, small independent businesses, whatever you can think of is in your community like that is who you need to work with. We need all of this inclusivity in order to get a true picture of the internet inequities. And we can share our own tested outreach materials and resources from our Chicago deployments to help you get started with your outreach efforts as well. So how all of this works is that first you can reach out to the University of Chicago and then to your local partners to recruit residents from your challenge areas in order to install the devices. And then your local partners will work with the state to determine these challenge areas, collect emails and addresses of interested households, and then share this data with us for device distribution. Next, UChicago will work with your local partners to distribute devices either by hosting a device pickup event, or we will mail the devices directly to the volunteers and assist them with the installation. And then participants will install the devices and they'll immediately begin collecting data. We can monitor the data during collection and we will keep it all standardized and centralized on our cloud services. And finally, UChicago will deliver insights to you and to your local partners, making sure that it's formatted within BEAD requirements, and all local partners will then coordinate with the volunteers to get the devices returned to us at the end of this deployment. So in summary, we really want to help making this data collection not only easier, but more accessible. Data-driven policy is essential to address complex issues like BEAD funding, and our data is developed by UChicago researchers. It's open source, accurate, transparent, and our device is easy to use. We aim to help you make robust BEAD challenges by giving you the research-backed data points, a comprehensive picture of internet performance measurements such as speed, latency, outages, and so much more. With our device, you can take many measures over a week without having to go in and manually take and record these yourself. And it makes it easy for people who may not have the time or skill set to do these types of measurements daily. So we can still get measurements to people that need it who may not otherwise engage in this challenge process, helping us to validate people's experiences in their day-to-day. This will democratize the BEAD challenge process by allowing busy people to participate and share their lived experiences. And in this way, our device is really a device of equity for you and your community. Anyone who's able to open a box and plug it into the wall is now going to be able to partake in the challenge process. And then from my personal experiences working out in the communities of Chicago, the people who really need help are typically not the people that have time to advocate for themselves. So we can just make this whole process easier for them through these device-driven solutions. And yep, thank you again. Thanks for your attention. And we would love to answer any questions you have at the end of this entire presentation. I know we have some more speakers after this. And yes, we encourage you to reach out to Shibuka at the email address below or to follow the link on the presentation for more information.
Thanks a lot, Mark and Zinga. We have some really good questions coming in. A few notes here. So this is one of the initiatives, as Alexis also has mentioned in the chat, that this is an open source tool. We're sharing this as a means to make it easier, as Nzinga shared, just easier for residents who might want to engage in speed testing and with work that you might have already done in your communities. If you have identified those pockets that could, use speed testing to accurately represent the lived experiences of residents, this would certainly be a good avenue. So the Illinois Office of Broadband can help you partner with the University of Chicago to engage in the process further. There's this interest form that we have requested you to fill out if you are a nonprofit or local government who's interested in participating. It has questions on your sense of target areas in the community where you would like to deploy devices, the number of devices you think would be needed to better reflect the data for your community. And also if you have a list of addresses, again, it's not a necessity, but because as we'd shared that some of this based on the timelines, we'll have to have some of this information coming in from the community partners, so the local government or the nonprofit, and really get to specific households that would be interested. If you have that, list already, that'll be helpful, or we can the university can actually help you with getting started on some of that and also getting a sense of number of devices. So we'll be sharing more information on by when we'd want you to fill out the interest form so that we have a sense of the different partners who would be interested. And then we can work, we can help enable the partnership and just decide on prioritization for some of the deployment efforts so that it's all done timely for the BEAD challenge process. So I know we have 10 minutes. We'll definitely get to the questions. I know Mark and Nzinga and team have been answering some of these in the chat as well. So I'm going to pass it on to the CostQuest team for now to share about the fabric licensing, and we will get to any unanswered questions towards the end. And Mark from the CostQuest team, do we have you on?
Thank you. Okay, now I'm unmuted. So good afternoon, everybody. Just want to quickly go through the licensing as Shibuka alluded to earlier. My name is Mark Gutman. I'm with CostQuest Associates, and I support the licensing and fulfillment product the licensing fulfillment for the NTIA project. So on the next slide, let me just give you a quick overview. There are 2 licenses that we have available for entities that are working within the BEAD context. So the Tier D license is intended for recipients or sub-recipients of federal broadband funds. So those are typically ISPs who are seeking an award of funding to build a network. They can also challenge under that license. What they receive is the NTIA fabric, which is a text file of all of the broadband serviceable locations within the state of Illinois. You can also get that file cut down to be county by county. And the use of that data, the purpose of the data is really for the purposes defined in the license. Like I said earlier, it's for challenging as well as in context of Tier D, seeking a broadband award. On the other hand, you could also, if you just want to participate in a challenge only, that would be a Tier E license, E as in Edwards, and that is open to units of local government, nonprofits, and other organizations that have qualified under an FCC Tier 4 license. So people working within the FCC BDC purpose. As I mentioned earlier, this is challenge only, so it's only for challenge activities and not for seeking an award. So let me skip into the next slide real quick. The Tier D license, the biggest benefit of that Tier D license is it allows you to analyze other federal grant opportunities. So this will qualify for BEAD, this will qualify for USDA, other Treasury programs if those are available. So the Tier D is intended for people who are looking to build networks and seeking funding opportunities as well as challenges. On the Tier E, next slide, please. On the Tier D, what you'll need to apply is your FCC FRN, which is, there's no cost to get that FRN through CORS if you don't have one. Your organization name, so the person who will be requesting the license as well, and some information about your organization, typically the website. Beyond that, what we ask people for is, as they're going forward in that Tier D process, to identify the counties that they're interested in, as well as the programs that they're interested in applying for that license under. So that's the Tier D. On the Tier E, as I said earlier, it's mainly there just to support the challenge process. So that's nonprofits, units of local government, and FCC Tier 4 licensees. On the next slide, it's a somewhat shorter list of information that's needed. Again, it's the FCC registration number, your FRN, your company or your entity's organizational information, and your URL to describe what your organization is. And then if you're a nonprofit, information substantiating your nonprofit status. So it's a quick set of questions on your FEIN, or if you have some other sort of registration letter that identifies your nonprofit status. That's the kind of information we're looking for to qualify you into that Tier E license. Now, the process is pretty straightforward, and thank you. What this flow chart is basically saying on the top portion, if you're seeking an NTIA fabric license, the top 2 diamonds are the Tier D folks, the challengers or the network builders. You'll come into a website. On the last page of these slides, there is a URL for that website. You'll fill out information in a license request form. You'll identify your counties, which are the 3 blocks in the middle. And then based on that information, someone in our team will approve or come back and ask you some other questions. Upon approval, you'll receive an email asking you to enter in the help desk system and asking for one final form to be completed. And that form provides the information that goes into your license. Based on the submission of that form, you'll get an electronic license from our signing platform, which is Sign Now. So it's a pretty straightforward process. On Tier E, everything is basically the same on that lower branch that we're looking at. You'll come into a website, slightly different URL. You'll fill out the license request. Based on your information, you'll get approved. And then upon approval, you'll get the license you'll get a request to supply license information to our help desk, and then receive subsequently a license for your signature. So normally that takes about 1 to 2 days. It might take a little bit longer. 1 to 2 business days. It might take a little bit longer if we have some questions about the information that was submitted in the license request form. So just kind of finishing up here on the next slide. Some things that might slow your license request down. We have lots of cases where people come into the system and ask us for a county and say that it's both awarded and prospective under the same program. So we'll come back and ask you a question about that. Requesting fabric for counties or programs that aren't available yet. So we'll, again, go back and ask you questions there. Identifying a program but not asking for any counties within it. That will stop the request. And then finally, applying for a license as an ineligible organization. So the Tier D is for ISPs. They can provide the data over to their consultants to help them on grant analysis and such. But if you are not seeking federal funds directly or have not received federal funds directly, you're not eligible for the D. So a lot of times we'll have consultants or engineering shops ask for the data directly. And the way that we've worked it out with NTIA is the ISP can hand the data over to their consultant, but the consultant can't ask for the data directly. So we get that question a lot on the tier D requests. That's a very quick summary of what we've done. There's also the resources, the URLs of the website for Tier D and E are available. And there's also a couple PDFs at the top that walk you through the process for both D and E. So these slides will be distributed with the rest of the decks later today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Mark. And thanks for the quick presentation as well and running with time. So I think this information is definitely helpful for any ISPs who are interested in participating. Definitely get started with the process. If there are any questions, we're also we can get you answers as the NTIA licensing help desk. That would be the first place to reach out to if you're a community or local nonprofit who is wanting to actively engage with the fabric and carry out more analysis. Definitely something to look into. And if there are additional questions, please feel free to reach out the help desk or also the Illinois Broadband Lab for any additional questions. Really quickly, I'm going to get to how to engage during the challenge process, and a lot of this is forthcoming. It's anticipated that we start the challenge process in December, but more likely in January next year. So what's really expected is publishing links for submitting challenges, conducting community outreach so that everybody is aware and can actively participate in the process. And then if you are a local unit of government or nonprofit, basically aggregating some of those challenges and submitting it to the state through the BEAD challenge portal. As I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a how-to webinar series with more specifics on the evidence requirements, the data that has to be submitted, how to aggregate a lot of this information if you're a local government or nonprofit, and how can residents engage in the process. And yeah, all of that information forthcoming with the next webinar series. We'll also be posting a communications toolkit to support some of the outreach efforts that will be needed for the process. So getting into the questions, it seems like we've answered a lot of them. But yeah, and I think I do see a lot of questions around the privacy around the Netrix initiative. So I see that the team has answered a lot of those. They do have resources in place. And again, we realize that a lot of nonprofits and local governments, you've been working in your communities. So really welcoming you to take a lead here because of that existing trust with residents. So that could be a way to actively engage them in the process. But Mark and Zinga, if you'd like to just share a little bit more on that. Oh, sure. And if we have other questions, definitely we can answer them.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in here briefly, Shabika, before we'll let those final comments be made. I want to just have Nancy put up a poll before we let everybody go, the ubiquitous poll. Quick response on the value of this webinar, and we will continue with the final questions. Go ahead. Mark and Zinka, if you'd like to wrap up, make any final comments, especially perhaps, as Shabika noted, with respect to the privacy, since that's clearly something that's on everybody's minds, even though you did answer the question directly in the chat.
Yeah, I feel like privacy is one of the biggest questions that I get, especially in any community meetings. I like to use this metaphor or a couple metaphors of how we deal with privacy, which is that our device does not actually see anything that you're doing on the internet. It only looks outwards. So say you have like a water pump for your house and the water is coming in. The water pump can see like how much water you're getting, but it doesn't see where the water is going. So it can't tell if it's going to like your pool or to the shower or to the kitchen. And our device is very similar in the way that we can see the quality of the internet that is coming, but we're only looking outwards and we can't see what's going on inside of the house. I don't know if Mark has something else that he'd like to say about it. Oh, okay, cool.
All right, well, unless there are any more questions, we have reached the end of our hour together and gone a little bit over. But, well, we've got one more popping in here. Candace has got a question. We're trying to get residents connected to ACP computer devices and skill workshops. I can't imagine we have the bandwidth for this.
Sure. Definitely a good comment there. Thanks for sharing, Candice. We certainly understand that there's a lot of different things going on. But this is something that we have to do for the BEAD challenge process, just making sure we get the map right so that, those eligible locations and locations that really need good infrastructure are listed accordingly on the maps. So if there are different pockets in your communities that you work with that could benefit from the effort, we would appreciate, if you're interested, please do reach out. But we understand the capacity constraints for sure. Then we have a question from Bill. Is the data from Netrix device the only data that'll be accepted for a challenge? No, so that's not the case. It's basically that the speed testing that is submitted for the challenge has some specifications in terms of it's supposed to be done 3 times in different days. And all of that. So just installing the device could make it easier for residents who would want to submit challenges that way. They wouldn't manually have to go in and carry out the speed test. The device is doing it for them. The other way is just using like an Ookla speed test that's available online, but having to do it 3 times on different days and then aggregating that information and submitting it to their local government or nonprofit. So that would be a process. That is why this is an alternative for residents who wouldn't want to go through that large process and just have a device that does the work for them. But there are additional speed tests that are also accepted for the BEAD challenge. Thanks for the question, Bill.
Good. Thanks, Shabika. So I think at this point, I'm just going to say on behalf of the University of Illinois Extension, Illinois Office of Broadband, Illinois Broadband Lab, thank you everyone for attending today's presentation. Hopefully you got great value out of it. You will get the materials as well as the connections to the speakers. So you'll have, should additional questions come up or additional information be required, you'll know where to go. I'd like to thank Matt and Shabika and Mark and Zinga and Matt for being here today, providing the information. Again, as I mentioned earlier, if you registered for the webinar, you'll receive the presentation materials and a link to the recording. If you didn't register, I think we've already received a number of emails for folks who will then be added to the mailing list to get those materials. You still have a few more moments to drop your email into the chat if you'd like to get those materials. I'd like to invite you to visit our website for future webinars. This is our shameless plug portion of the presentation. At go.illinois.edu/LGE. For example, we've got coming up next Thursday, November 2nd at noon, over the noon hour, we're offering a program with Bradley University's Small Business Development Center on small business finance, IRS tips for small business. Please consider joining us. And remember, you can use the same extension resource to find recordings of a host of our prior presentations on a wide variety of topics. So with that, thank you again for attending today's webinar. Have a great day, and we hope to see you back for future presentations. Thanks.